Thank you for joining today's webinar, Young Adult Voices on the Impact of COVID-19 on Youth Involved in the Juvenile Justice System. My name is Zainab Farhat. I'm with the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the NE Foundation, and I'll be moderating today. This is the first in a series of 4 webinars that are led and designed by young people who are part of Casey's Juvenile Justice Youth Advisory Council, and they also carry many other roles, which you'll hear about today. Some of the goals for today, we're looking to hear directly from young adults that are connected to youth in the justice system, both in sort of residential and community settings. We'll get a sense of what youth are experiencing, how they're coping, what local and state systems have done in response to COVID-19, some of the things that may have been overlooked, and sort of what opportunities there are for systems and communities to act on in service of the well-being of young people in juvenile justice. And as Shavante said, we'll have some time at the end to ask some questions. So I'm just gonna start off with some introductions. So panelists, if you can share your name, what your role is and what state you're in, and if you could share something or someone that brings you joy. Why don't we start with Miracle?
Thank you, Zainab. Hi, everyone. My name is Miracle Te'o. I am a youth ambassador for the Santa Clara County Youth Advisory Council located in California. Something that brings me joy is food, dessert, to be specific, ice cream. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Darrell.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darrell Frazier. I am a policy advocate for Job Opportunities Task Force based here in Baltimore, Maryland. And something that brings me joy is traveling. I love experiencing new cultures and new people. And I'll pass it over to Miguel.
Good morning for me out here in California. My name is Miguel Garcia. I'm a policy coordinator with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition out here in Sacramento. We also have an office in Los Angeles. Something that brings me joy is going on hikes with my daughter and my family. And I'll pass it on to Ileana.
Thank you, Miguel. Hi, my name is Ileana Pujos. I'm the Director of Community Connections for the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance out in Connecticut. And I think I recently discovered something new that brings me joy. I bought a puppy. And as much as she's a pain, she makes me very, very happy, especially since I live by myself. So it's my new joy.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. So as I mentioned, you're all working directly with or hearing directly from youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system, whether that's those who reside in or were recently released from facility settings, or those who may be in community settings. So for our first question today, can you talk about what you're hearing from youth about their experiences during COVID-19? What are they feeling and how are they coping? Darrell, why don't we start with you?
Yes, youth involved in the justice system are a part of the most marginalized and vulnerable populations of individuals who come from the communities here in Baltimore that we speak about every single day, right? How are youth coping with the pandemic that is occurring currently? Our youth detention centers here in Baltimore, Maryland have offered limited access to educational resources and social emotional learning exercises to our young people. What we're hearing is that some of our young people are on confinement for at least up to 23 hours a day due to the idea of social distancing, which isn't really the most appropriate or proper way to, address this issue when it comes to young people, because young people still need that opportunity to engage with one another in a way that is still, ensuring their health and safety while the pandemic is occurring. Also here in Baltimore, there hasn't really been an plan implemented to the response to COVID-19, right? For the safety of not just the young people that are in the facilities, but the people who are employed. So all of the correctional officers, folks who work in the cafeteria, folks who work as educational directors, et cetera, they are constantly engaging, they are constantly exiting the building and entering the building. So they are the ones who the young people come in contact with the most. In some cases, young people have to create their own mask and have to clean their own rooms where they are laying and sleeping just because they are aren't properly being taken care of while the pandemic is occurring. So right now, these are just some of the stories and some of the things that I'm hearing from those young people who are in the facilities, who I engage with, and even those who are returning back to the communities are still experiencing challenges because they aren't being offered a proper reentry plan. And so their basic needs aren't being met, such as housing, such as, food insecurity, such as educational opportunities, things of that nature. Employment is such a really, really big issue. And so our homeless population is constantly increasing due to the fact that there isn't really no real reentry plan for our young people. And they're constantly just being, being released into their community without any type of support or resources. And so coping wise, young people, as far as I've been hearing, it's been a cry out for help, for some type of support and guidance while this pandemic is occurring here in Baltimore.
Thank you, Daryl. Do others want to respond to the same question?
Hi, so yeah, I would just really amplify everything that Darrell said. I think also for those who are like re-entering, right, this is a time of confusion for them, right? So kids are really used to like things like probation being super mandatory and there's no way around it, right? And now we're sort of shifting into a space where like we're finding ways around probation and we don't need to check in as often. And all the things that they thought were like life or death, right, when it came down to probation, of like I need to get this done or I go back in, they're confused now, right? I hear a lot of like confusion coming from young people of like, is this mandatory? Was it always mandatory? What's the difference now? If it's the same, right? Less supervision now, but before it was like micromanaging, like what, they're very just disconnected as far as like how quick things are changing, and how much is really honestly being communicated to them, right? So I think that that's one of the things, and just to add, right, another thing, I feel like I had a conversation with a couple of young people about education, right? And what does education look like for them inside and outside of the system? And a lot of young people are at a point of like feeling as if, like if they felt like they weren't, there was no chance of succeeding higher education before, they definitely feel it now, right? Of like education sort of seems impossible. And they're very aware of the different things that are happening as far as education, right? Some cities are getting laptops, some cities are getting packets, right? And mandatory drop off for their packets and stuff like that. So I think things like that are just really putting a lot of young people in this phase of like super confusion. So yeah, I would just add that and again, amplify Darrell's point.
Yeah, in California, we've seen like throughout our majority of the counties a drastic decrease in population. For a time, and for the youth inside our state facility, it's a very confusing time. And this population is deemed for long-term placement up to the age of 25 for have committed some serious harms. And in the process, COVID is occurring. There's discussions about transitioning the authority to our local entities in the counties. And so again, to reiterate the messages that were mentioned earlier, is like there is a lot of confusion for these young people, is like not sure, they get lost in this bureaucracy. They're really not being able to program inside facilities. There's a lot of challenges because of movement has kind of ceased inside institutions, but also for the youth that are not able to be transferred, there's some areas within some regions that don't have the programming, suitable enough to meet the young person's needs. And so having them either be discharged or early release is always coming up to their mind. And that's something too in California that for our state youth population, they're asking, why is our governor releasing an adult population but is not willing to release these young populations? And I know that there's community-based organizations wanting to partner up with probation departments, with the agencies that will be overseeing the discharge. And so I think there's just, again, a lot of confusion, frustration, because yeah, programming is not the normal. The essentials of having a laptop and a hotspot in order to be involved in is like a lot of youth don't have those types of access. Many organizations and some agencies are really trying to provide and fill that digital gap that a lot of young people get. And I think Ileana had mentioned earlier, school was hard, and now imagine how learning over the computer, it's even harder. And so, yeah, just a lot of the young people that I'm speaking with are really just frustrated and confused and not sure how to get through this process. And I think this is a time where they are going to be frustrated, but are those that with them have to understand that their whole life they haven't had the tools to cope with certain things, and this is something that the whole world is coping with, and we're expected them to act a certain way. So meeting them or walking with them is important, and I think that's what their frustration brings up a lot.
Thank you, Miguel. Miracle, do you want to add anything on what you're hearing from young people about what they're feeling or how they're coping, and additionally maybe what needs of theirs that either are being met and maybe not being met?
No, I'll just be repeating what my colleagues already said.
Great. So we're hearing that young people they're confused. There's a lot of uncertainty. In some cases, aren't getting appropriate access to PPE, aren't being prepared for reentry if they are returned to communities. How are local systems and communities being responsive to sort of the emerging and shifting needs of young people? So if we're thinking about, Miguel mentioned, the needs of young people who are incarcerated were already sort of significant prior to COVID. COVID has sort of presented additional maybe needs for young people that have maybe been exaggerated or even shifted a little. So what are you seeing from local systems in the regions you're in? And Ileana, if we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the response has been really interesting, right? As far as systems, I feel like they're functioning interestingly. I think, so just like starting, right, for example, probation is very focused on maintaining surveillance while also trying to provide services, right? But they're not functioning as a 24-hour around the clock model. And in reality, right, that's what these young people need. They're still continuing to function like a 9 to 5, and that's just not the reality of this time right now. Young people need the services around the clock, and they're really reliant on the ground community organizations to provide those services, but they also still want to maintain surveillance. So it's like the relationship there is also getting damaged, right? Because they're saying, you want to surveil me, but you don't want to directly help me. So I think that relationship has been really interesting. And then like programming, right? Programming has basically been put at a halt. We have, we've seen articles in Connecticut and op-eds come out of like, the crime is rising and kids are doing this and kids are doing that, but it's like kids have nowhere to go. A lot of young people, I don't think people understand, right, relied on the school setting, relied on that to get out of the house, relied on that for meals, relied on that just to build like compadre or whatever it's called, right? To be with their friends, to build friendships, to just do something different than being in the house. And now we have young people that are stuck at home all day, right? And we don't necessarily know what their home situations are like. And I think that systems and community are still very much responding in silos instead of realizing like there's an intersectionality between all of this, right? And I think that COVID itself has really presented like an emphasis on that of like, this isn't just a juvenile justice issue. This isn't a housing issue. This is not a child welfare issue. This is a systemic issue. Like, and if you guys don't realize that all these things intersect and we all need to be working together to meet the needs of young peoples and community, then that's a problem, right? And I feel like that problem has been very apparent in this time. And again, some systems and organizations are still functioning in a silo and as if those things do not intersect. So I think that that's really interesting. And then even like leveraging the technology stuff, right? it's not a one size fits all solution. And I know education is probably the hardest conversation to have, right? Because we want to make sure kids are getting the education and have somewhere to go other than home. But we also understand like our kids are not going to be lab rats. And we're not just going to throw them in school to test the COVID and see if it actually spreads or not, right? So I feel like things like education are really tough to talk about and figure out like what is the solution, because we have kids who don't have access to Wi-Fi, who don't have access to laptops, right? And a lot of places, don't get me wrong, are really working on like distributing laptops and getting kids the resources that they need, but that's just a short-term band-aid on the wound, right? We need to be having a conversation about the economic insecurity issue, right? Why can't these people afford laptops? Why can't they afford housing or Wi-Fi or stuff like that? And these aren't the conversations that a lot of systems and organizations are really digging deep into. So I think it's really interesting. And COVID also has presented the idea of like a lot of the stuff we've been asking for, right, as an advocacy organization, as a community, as an individual, are all of a sudden getting, like those needs are getting met to a certain extent, right? And it's like, are you going to maintain and sustain those needs after COVID? Right now, because we see you have the dollars, you have the resources to make like emergency housing happen, or you have all these people that you're releasing. Is that something that we're going to continuously keep doing, right? Because we see it's possible. And now that like a lot of different states have presented all these resources, you know, community is going to expect those resources to stay in place, right? Some of these resources are things that we've been asking for a long time. And even like in Connecticut, you know, our governor made it very clear this upcoming budget year, we don't have no space for programming. And it's like, that blows my mind, because if anything, I feel like this is the time where we need programming, right? We should be able to recognize that if we had programming in place, proper programming, things would be so much easier and be running so much more smoothly in a time like this. So I think some agencies have been responding the right way. Some are just like completely clueless of the idea of like, it's so much bigger than just juvenile justice. It's so much bigger than figuring out where the kid goes. It's so much bigger than figuring out how you're going to surveillance them. And it's going to present, and it has already presented a lot of conversations that are going to be super long term. And it's not going to stop along with the pandemic. It's going to continue to move forward. So I think that the responses have been very interesting.
If I could just add that I want to echo what Ileana has just stated. And every time Ileana speaks, she lights a fire under me, because she brings awareness to a lot of, it's like I have a connection with her. She always brings all of the thoughts that are running through my mind, and she actually says it. So to talk about, let's be very clear, right? So COVID, the pandemic, did not introduce the systemic issues that had been in place. These issues had been occurring for decades. COVID has only enhanced, it has heightened the identity of the issue. So issues such as the digital divide, issues such as education, issues such as mental health, medical, housing, all of these needs that are unmet for our young people who are involved in the youth justice system, right? And so how I think about it is that a lot of these systems and a lot of the folks who are in the powers of making decisions on behalf of those systems are failing our young people. And they're failing them because, as Ileana stated, this isn't just a one issue. This isn't something you can take a cookie cutter approach to. This needs to be something that, you know, agencies and systems are actually collaborating and working together to address the issues. There should be wraparound services that are approaching the issues from a holistic approach, right? That are providing these young people with all of the essential resources and tools that they need in order to thrive and be successful. There's no reason why that I should hear of, you know, the numbers increasing amongst the LGBTQ community when it comes to homeless due to the fact that we have a pandemic that's occurring. There's no reason why, you know, for those young people who had developmental disabilities who are now returning home or even currently still incarcerated within these systems, that they should still, you know, that they aren't even getting the social needs that needs to be met, right? So as Ileana stated, I think that at a time like this, there shouldn't be a conversation around, you know, why we can't do X, Y, and Z because we don't have funding. Funding isn't always the issue. Sometimes it's about how we take the approach with the funding that we have. We have to start thinking creatively and innovatively when we are taking approach to topics such as education. And yes, these will be hard conversations that we will have to have. But guess what? This should be something that needs to happen because our youth, our young people, they are the future. They should be made a priority. There's no reason why folks should be going on recess, or folks who are in power should be taking breaks, during a time where we are in the middle of a pandemic. This is something that is important and that are impacting people who are part of the most vulnerable populations and marginalized communities. And so I'll leave it there because I could go on and on and on, but I'll pass it over to one of my other colleagues so they can express their thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. And actually, I was gonna, a couple of you have already mentioned in your responses sort of there has been a significant impact on programming, on access to educational services. Miguel, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that piece for young people who are currently residing in facilities. You mentioned that the onus has sort of been put on community agencies to kind of fill that technology gap. And I'm also curious kind of what you've seen sort of in response from the local systems where you are. And then I guess, well, I'll hold off to ask my second question. We'll start there.
Yeah. So our organization, along with a few organizations, are very fortunate enough to have made that transition over to virtual programming inside our state facilities, which we currently have 3 of them right now inside in California. And so that shift at the beginning, it's difficult. You're always having technical challenges on setting things up with the young people inside there. Groups are no more than 10, and it's, I think also too, they make it voluntarily, and that's good, and you sometimes get 3, 4, 5, 10, but no more than 10 youth per groups as compared to the larger sum that organizations would normally have when providing program inside. There's not that much interaction. It's very kind of like again, it's new for a lot of these young people. I think the intent on one side and the intent from the other, from the agency that's trying to bridge this gap, is with well intentions. But the thing is, this is new. This is like new for individuals. This is like really what the young person is like really trying to search and like get the intent that's being thrown virtually. And so you could see the challenges and the frustration with that. Family visitations being virtual. I think we've all spoken up about how some families may not have the technology. Out here in California, you're getting power shut down in some areas and things like that. And so yeah, there's new nuances that are struggles that have heightened up the need for a lot of families, especially communities of color. And yeah, I think that those are some of the things we've tried to face. The trade programs in some institutions have completely stopped. Some, like coding, has transitioned over to correspondence. Education is held in unit facilities, again, to limit contact with other youth among others living in different units. And so the thing is, like, I'm kind of like taking back is like when I was in an institution, I felt that I was taken away from my like a good education, and I went to a public school, and then like while I was in there, I was like, well, this is not, like, it's just completing packets and all this stuff. Like, there's really not that much learning. And then imagine that, like, having like a solitary or segregation type of programming intended to your public health, like, it's a challenge trying to do that. You know, some facilities are limited to the amount of youth that could be out. Again, they're pockets of youth. Like majority of the time, the youth are being housed in their rooms. But I know that there's intention from agencies to let them out, but COVID just has restricted so much. But then again, the solution to this is that especially need with community collaboration is to discharge or partner up with some type of local community housing that offers more liberty. I think we in California, what I'm trying to grasp and what we're trying to tell our DAs and lawmakers is that, you know, accountability for so long has been measured with a longevity of time or a punitive type of punishment or supervision. I've heard young people, and I remember myself, is that the more liberation that I felt, even when young people are fighting the fires right now in fire camp, they felt more accountable, that they could do something, bringing hope, you know, building a structure to be redeemable. Those are the steps to accountability. And so, yeah, thinking that, you know, a young person has to do their time within a confined space of like rock and metal. I think this is a time for us to start thinking differently and how that looks. And I know that there's conversations in Los Angeles on the way it looks as it seeks to have an alternative to sending youth to a state facility who commit serious harms, and have it done locally. So, yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. And I think you raised many great points, and one of the things you raised was around sort of like the importance of family connection. Have you seen any changes in sort of family, besides the kind of a shift to virtual? Has there been significant changes in maybe like the frequency of family contact, whether that's through phone calls or online visits?
I think that's sometimes challenging for two reasons. Like, because in California you have within our justice system, like you have kind of two mixed populations. You have the young people that are at the county level, that families have that, you know, communication because they're still either a guardian or someone that could talk to. But when you get into the state level, and I turned 18, I signed something that I forgot, I didn't know what I signed, that I have to disclose any information to any adult wanting to request it because I'm 18 now. And so when young people get tested, you know, in California, we've had these conversations already, with the administration as well as with the department, and saying that at one time, families were finding out that their young loved ones had contracted COVID through their loved ones rather than the state. And so, you know, there's just that mixture of, like, I guess, family barrier is like when a young person becomes a technical adult, and the family is very limited to the amount of information that they get. But I think having some type of public transparency, having agencies like really, I think, have agencies and facilities go and be objective, is that, imagine this is their kid. How could I have peace of mind, or how could I give peace of mind, you know, while working in here? Like, one is like, if I had my kid or I had a kid in there, is like, I want to know if they're tested. I want to know like what type of programming. I want to know what are means and ways that you know, things are being worked out. I think a very fluid transparency is because this is facilities are very, again, you could contract a lot of stuff. So they're like, it's like your kid's in a hospital, and so I'm trying to figure something out, as well as like your kid's in a detention facility trying to be held accountable. And so I think just more frequent transparency with loved ones, public data dashboards is helpful. But also too, like having parole agents, probation officers, it's going to be a tough job, but it's going to be the job that they need to do, is calling every week, like, hey, so-and-so is good. Like, whether you leave a message, a text message, an email, I think an effort from an agency has to go in the direction of like, how could I provide peace of mind to a guardian, a loved one, and a parent?
Great, thank you, Miguel. My next question is for Miracle. So Miracle, I guess, in thinking of all these challenges that facilities and sort of the community are facing due to COVID-19, can you provide an example of something innovative that's been implemented sort of where you are in Santa Clara County that has addressed one of these challenges that you've heard from your peers?
Yeah, just a background of the council that I'm on. The council is a partnership between the Juvenile Probation Department and a community-based organization. So during this time, we as a council have been working a lot with the community-based organization in one, providing a safe space for youth. And we do this by simply, checking in with youth weekly to really see like where they are at, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We ask them like, what do they need? Instead of us telling them what do they need, or asking them, what kind of support do you need during this time? And for the most part, what we're hearing from those youth is they need a safe space. They just need a space where they can just come and feel normal again, feel like a youth. And that looks like different ways of providing like, a paint night, doing a spoken word night, doing a comedy night, doing a healing circle. And these are all coming from the youth. So that's like one creative way that we've helped out an organization to really provide that to youth. And also we've been in focus groups to help this organization to figure out like what are the essentials that youth need who are in the hall. What are some things that they that we can provide them that will help them, bring some type of peace to them during this time, because we're not in jail and we're not at peace. So just imagine how they feel, and that's not new either. So the main thing I feel like that's most creative is that the organizations we've been working with and with probation is that they're leaning on the voices of the youth. And I think that's a common theme that's not new, that COVID-19 has also highlighted during this time. It's like, what do youth need? What do youth need? But that's something that should have already been asked before COVID-19. And I'm hoping that with that coming to the forefront now, that it will be continued to be used as throughout this pandemic and afterward, to really rely heavily on the youth voices, however that looks like, councils in your county or just any youth advocates, and to really lean on to their expertise, because me and my colleagues here on this call, we're on this call for a reason, not just for the work that we do, but we have experience. We're coming from also a personal experience place where we get to speak to the work that we do. And also like what's really been nice, that we've also got to collaborate with other youth organizations when it comes to the education system, and really address the people who are empowered in the school system, to ask them like, hey, like, why don't we have any counselors? Why are there so many SROs? Like, why? Like, we get to really ask them, and this is because this is all coming from youth. And now that we're transitioning onto online platform, now we're really working around what does reallocating those funds look like? So that's just a bit what we've been doing as a council, just really being in partnership with the community-based organization, as well as probation department. I'm working on a collective impact project as well to, be the bridge between police and our community. What does that look like? How to end racism? How do we amplify youth voice more, instead of just saying we want youth voice at the table, but don't even acknowledge that they're at the table. So those are just a few things that we're working on. Thank you, Zainab, for that question.
Great, thank you, Miracle. And I'll actually open up that question to the rest of you. I think Miguel already started answering some of this in his earlier response, and some of you have alluded about some solutions. But sort of what are the opportunities for local systems and communities to act on to better support the needs of young people in juvenile justice, whether that's in the facility side or the community side?
I
Go
think
ahead,
me and Darrell unmuted at the same time. We literally share a brain, but I'll tap in and then Darrell, I guess you could tap in and just build on anything I say. But yeah, so I think, again, kind of amplifying what I said earlier of like, this is a perfect opportunity for them to build on collaboration, right? And acknowledge the intersectionality and just realize and recognize that they need to be working collaboratively with other systems and organizations. But I think this is also a really interesting time for them to compare. Yeah, I mean, COVID has its restrictions of like 6 feet away, all these things, and especially inside the facilities, they're pretty much utilizing solitary confinement as an alternative, right? And utilizing solitary as a way to keep young people away from each other. And I think this is a really good time for state agencies to reflect on how is that different from what they've been doing outside of COVID. And if it's, people are really pressing the issue of solitary confinement now, it was an issue before COVID. And how some of the things that they're practicing now and implementing now are not very different from what they were doing before. And these things being very harmful to young people and their health and their mental health, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for reflection. And I also think, right, I mean, young people have really just been leading the movement lately with the protests, with everything. I think this is a really, a very rich time to prioritize needing to work directly with directly impacted communities. And acknowledging, right, when things go wrong, those being directly impacted are out here like expressing themselves, right? And again, mostly young people leading protests, leading, organizing meetings, whatever it may be. I think this is a good time to latch onto that and really build on that partnership and collaboration. So I'll kind of stop and let Darrell tap in.
Okay, so I'm going to build off of what Ileana was stating. Also, like I really don't see anything innovative that the systems here in Baltimore or in the surrounding areas are doing. Right now, I really just see a lack of implementation, just because I think that there isn't any direction or any like critical or specific plan that they have in place. And I think that's the problem. I think that, as Ileana said, that this is an opportunity for them to kind of do more research. Although we really don't have the time, I feel like there should have been plans implemented for, times like this where there was a public health crisis, what they would do in moments like this. But it's here, it's happening. So what can we do now, right? Instead of focusing and worrying so much about what the problems really are, although they are important, what are we really going to do now in this moment to help, desensitize or to help decrease the amount of youth who are in these systems that are being impacted by what's going on? And so I think right now, pushing for more community-based alternatives rather than over-incarceration should be something that is talked more about, because as we can see, the overcrowding in detention centers isn't really working well in facilities. And right now, there isn't really no rehabilitation that is happening for young people or that is currently occurring. So we know that, the purpose of the facilities or the detention centers aren't really being met, right? So right now, I think there's an opportunity for us to really start doing some deep dive thinking around, what is it that young people really need and what's going to best benefit them, especially right now in a moment where we're experiencing so many racial inequities and racial injustice that is occurring solely based off the fact that young people are experiencing poverty, right? Because of the impact of poverty that it's having on the most vulnerable population in communities, predominantly Black and brown folks. And so I really think that, yes, absolutely, and healing too, with more restorative justice practices within communities. And so I'll leave it there. Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. That's all that I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell.
I think.
Go ahead, Michael.
I think pressing it too many times and it messes up like that. But I wanted to answer one of the questions that I believe Serena asked, is like, how can defenders better help young people during this time? One of the things is that for what I'm learning here in California is that there are attorneys from all counties some counties are trying to get back youth from the state facilities and back to the local area jurisdiction. And I think what they're using is they're doing a 779 petition, which kind of focuses on like the programming, like, has the programming or the service that the client had and the reason for them going to that institution, has that ceased to be applied to them or given to them in order for them to be like on that path of rehabilitation. And if so, then I guess that could be a reason for them to get discharged into a safe and like secured environment or somewhere where they cannot commit harm or something like that. But also too, like getting guidance from an op-ed from our Attorney General saying that directors of these institutions, chiefs of probations, have the authority to discharge or release young people when it's deemed necessary, like and they're not safe. And so really collaborating with agencies and trying to figure out is like, okay, there's been a national decrease within our institutions. Like, again, I think I would have them in my mind is like, how can we better serve the youth out there in the community prior for them to getting inside? And I think this is the moment into doing that, and understanding that, maybe, just having that in mind, and working with like your facilities.
Thank you, Miguel. So we're going to continue to take the questions that are coming up in the chat, and I think so. There was a question that came up for Miracle specifically around, what are some of the things that the youth asked for in the juvenile hall to bring them some peace, and what has been done about them. I know, Miracle, you answered it in the chat, but do you want to kind of respond to that so everyone can sort of hear your response? And
Sure.
Part of that too was a question that came up around, I really like the paint night mentioned by Miracle, and interested in more ideas like this that probation might offer our youth. What are some ways to engage that are not just supervision based?
Right. So I had shared with Dana that some of the things that we have as youth have come up with to give to the youth in the hall, and what they've requested are basically things to express themselves during this time. As we know, art is a great way and a healthy outlet for youth to express how they feel and what they are thinking. So we've suggested things like coloring books. A lot of youth are very artistic, whether that's even just journaling, crayons, and providing them the supplies, crayons, markers, as well as even like we came up with like books, comics, and I had said to Dana, it's like those are also tools for youth to escape from their reality and to really just feel like a youth. That's the thing about youth in the system. From my personal experience, and a lot from what I've heard from my peers and from the youth that I've spoken to with the work that I do, is that we just feel like we have to grow up faster than we have to, as if our childhood is robbed from us. So for youth to feel like a youth, like that means a lot. It absolutely means a lot. And really, and we use it in like cards, like games, like just, we want youth to like remember what it was like to be a kid, what it was like to play games with one another, what it was like to just not have to worry about the world or worry about their freedom and their life being in the hands of the system and what that's going to do to them, and when it comes to like the paint night, when I think of ways to engage that are not supervision based, if you want youth to be engaged, you have to engage with them. And that starts off by simply asking them, what do they like? If they're an artist and want to paint, then, direct them to that resource. And even, I would even encourage probation officers to even take those classes with them. Not just like, okay, here, you go do this. Like, make the youth feel like you're with them by actually participating in these activities and in the interest of the youth. going back to, I just wanted to add into that question of like how local systems and communities can better support youth in the system. When I think about that question, I think back to what Ileana had brought up about silos. One thing I've noticed, especially more during this pandemic, with the work that I do in the spaces that I am, adults in these positions love to hear themselves talk. They love to hear themselves talk, leaving no room for the youth in the room to speak. And that's a problem, because the thing is, we wouldn't even be having this webinar if adults didn't, if youth voice was involved in the first place, about their freedom, about their rehabilitation, about their life. So one thing, when I think about systems and communities, it's okay to not have all the answers. That is perfectly fine. It's okay to not know everything. And I say that because in that, you're able to welcome in and open up the space to share that power with youth in your own communities who have the expertise, and to really be that authentic, to show that authentic youth partnership. So I feel like during this pandemic right now, a lot of organizations and systems should be really heavily relying on their youth advocates more than any other time before, because we had to all remember like why we do this work. It's for the youth. It's not for ourselves. So that's all I wanted to share.
I love that, Miracle. I am going to open up a couple other questions that have come up in the chat. The next question is, in any of your areas, is GPS being used as a release alternative? And if so, what is your feeling about using this alternative? What are some ways to reduce the feeling that this is still a deprivation of liberty?
Okay, so I'll begin. So here in Baltimore, GPS monitoring is still being used as a tool for release, right? I am not in support of it. I am against it. I believe that during a time right now, we are in an economic crisis. Folks are losing their jobs. They are losing their housing. We are losing so much during this time. And so for us to release someone on GPS monitoring where, that individual is instructed or or is placed with the responsibility to have to pay for the devices or to remain on GPS monitoring is a problem. And so for me, I don't believe in juvenile fines and fees being a thing for the young person or the family, right? For the parents or whoever is taking care of that young person, due to the fact that there are so many other things that are occurring in life right now. And so to place another burden on them is just not a solution to the problem. It's a Band-Aid. So.
Do others want to chime in on this? It's okay if not. Okay. Oh, Miguel, were you going to chime in?
Mm-mm.
No? Oh, okay. First and foremost, thank you for all your work, as well as taking the time to lead this important conversation. I'm wondering if any of you can speak to truancy during COVID-19.
So I think that's going to be a unique thing today too, is like the challenge within that. Again, noticing like, how comfort is it to like let people into homes, young people not having, again, Wi-Fi. You're going to see some exacerbations occur in areas, in communities where youth don't have those resources. Also too, for families that are not able to stay at home, I think it's going to be a challenge for many of those. And I think because school years and schools just started, we're gonna see that. And I say that because we're hearing from a lot of young people, they need this, they need that, and it's like they don't have that. And so trying to again first fill in that digital void is something that we need, but also the services, like the after school programs, like the daycares, there's just so many overlapping areas where when the school year has started that young people are going to be affected. And yeah.
I'll add on to truancy as well, especially during COVID-19. I know that for the most part, engaging with youth who were still in school prior to the COVID-19 pandemic occurring, truancy was a big discussion, right? Here in Baltimore City, truancy contributed to a high percentage of young people who were referred to the youth justice system. SROs were constantly being called. Parents were constantly being called as well when it came to the young person not attending school. And so I think we really need to do a little bit more research around truancy, especially during a time like now, and start to redefine what truancy really is, right? And how we personally define it. I know that a lot of young people, there's a notion that a lot of young people, they just decide not to go to school, or that they don't value education, or that they don't want to obtain an education. But that's not really the case for all youth. A lot of young people are experiencing challenges outside of the classroom that hinders them from being able to really be fully present in school. They have challenges at home, they have challenges in their community, whether some of them are, to Miracle's point, they are being forced to grow up early on in their childhood and what they actually are. Some of them are already, they're big brothers and big sisters, and they are forced now to take care of their younger siblings, while mommy, who's a single mom, is working 2 jobs just so that she can provide for them because daddy isn't around. So for me, I look at truancy as a way to really start to really start to dig deep on what is the reason why this particular young person isn't attending school, and create like some support rather than refer them to the youth justice system, because incarcerating a young person or putting them in a detention center isn't going to solve the problem, or threatening to fine the parent a certain fee because this young person has missed a certain amount of days isn't really going to solve the issue. I think identifying what the root cause problem is for that young person not attending school, and then providing some additional resources or tools, or connecting them to an organization that can better support them, would be a better alternative rather than incarceration. Thank you.
The next question that came from the audience is, how can we use the failures that COVID has highlighted within or about the justice system to continue to build momentum towards prison abolition? And that's open for anybody to respond. And I can repeat the question. How can we use the failures that COVID has highlighted about the justice system to continue to build momentum towards prison abolition?
So in California, we were working on a bill that, and I say we amongst the coalition, to reinvest in funds that were directly allocated to probation in an agency. What we came across is that it highlighted like that there was no reporting being done on the money that was given to an agency such as probation and the services they provided. Like they would get money for a certain program, so it'll be probably like a school resource office program or voluntary probation or something, but you wouldn't see outcomes. It would just say this is the program that was funded, and we didn't see no outcomes. And one of the things is that there's like no data backing up like what they're doing worked and like how effective it was. And so we were trying to go ahead and inform and educate individuals that, you know, the money and the entity that was meant to distribute the money found lots of flaws. Is that the people that decide on how the money is being used, you know, some counties didn't have the proper, like, again, having people that are impacted and affected by the community is important when, looking to solve issues. And so that was one of the issues, is that some counties didn't have that. They were still supporting programming for status offenses, when status offenses are in California cannot be no longer criminalized. And so there was just a lot of flaws into that. However, we came across and I think COVID had highlighted that, and it's saying like, well, this is what the community needs, as to compared to what agencies or that have ties with law enforcement have done, because those were challenges. But multidisciplinary teams are something that were formed to decide it, but again, some counties didn't have that. But that's something that we were moving forward to. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but it's something that it was highlighted through an audit, and just seeing like following the money, and just seeing how reinvestment to the community is needed. And also in California, is like, I've been thinking a lot lately is how to be strategically crafty with my wording, so that we can make it palatable for individuals that may not be as into it or invested into the conversation as those that are impacted. So that's something that we did, but it's still working, using audits, finding discrepancies. But COVID has helped us change that narrative, that community involvement and community participation is a need, as we see a decrease in youth population in detention facilities, and the need for youth to be served in the community increase.
Thank you, Miguel. Would anybody else like to respond to that question? No. Okay. I think we have time for one more. Okay.
I was just going to add, just to echo what Miguel said, through policy reform. So policy is a way to systemically reform systems long-term that impact systems on a long-term scale. So if there's any way that we could use COVID, like all of the issues that we've highlighted through the impact of COVID-19 on youth justice systems, right now we have plenty of data, of information, of op-eds. I mean, you name it, we have it to drive the narrative of, the issues that are occurring and how we can successfully, reform these systems through policy reform. And so I would encourage everyone who may be interested in ways to kind of, change system and impact systems, to do that, by calling your policymakers and other stakeholders in these systems that have powers to make the decisions. And that's all.
Thank you, Darrell. So I don't think we're gonna have any more time to take more questions. However, we encourage the discussion to continue on JDI Connect, and what we can do for the questions that weren't answered, we can follow up and kind of share the responses to those questions with the recording. I want to thank you, Miguel, Darrell, Miracle, and Ileana, for your invaluable insight today. To our audience, this was part one of a series of 4 webinars. The next webinar is going to focus on youth participation in local movements for Black lives and new justice system reform and policy opportunities to push for in the post-George Floyd murder era. So we'll hear directly from young people who've experienced the justice system on that topic. The recording is going to be available on JDI Connect. And again, as I mentioned, we'll be able to answer any additional questions we didn't get to today. I think I'm turning it back to Shavante to close us out.
Thank you, everyone. Again, I want to reiterate, thank you to our amazing panel and our moderator, Zainab, for engaging in such a great discussion. Zainab actually said all the things that needed to be said. Again, this is going to be posted on JDI Connect. We are going to post the recording along with the discussion questions. And it'll also have contact information for our panelists. If you have any additional follow-up questions you want to ask them directly, all of that will be posted on JDI Connect within the next day or so. Again, thank you all for attending this webinar, and we look forward to you attending the next one. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks. Bye.